So on the 30th of October 2024, Labour's first budget in 14 years. This is going to be read by Reeves, the Chancellor, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer. And we can see our former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, obviously on his last day, talking in Parliament. So this is good news. Well, I don't know if it's good news, but it's some news. And so the issues here that has been mentioned are one to do with the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, which is predicted to rise. There's also been talk about more money for the NHS, which is currently led by West Written, being the Health Secretary, and so many other issues, and also the potential of the talk for a rise in taxes. I guess, tax rises are always a sensitive issue, but once again, you need that sort of money. You need the money to invest in public services, i.e. public transport, housing, and a lot. And so that is going to be expected. So we look forward to see what kind of a budget is going to come out. Rises in the minimum wage is of course something that corporates are always not going to be happy with. But we've lived in the sort of neoliberal era of small government, small spending, and obviously accumulation of wealth by the very wealthy. And we've obviously, according to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which started in 2015, the aim was to basically eradicate poverty, look at the environment, look after the environment, and so many other positive issues, and obviously bridge inequalities. But the reality is that the inequality gap since COVID is widened dramatically. We are going to make other videos, on a rice-based economy that will somehow address some of these issues. And so there is that need to sort of tax and spend to boost the economy. And obviously, the more people have in their pockets, I always say, the more disposable income they have, the more they can invest in the economy, and the more governments can actually tax earnings. And so we are going to see how this budget really pans out.
So I'm proud to have been the first British Asian Prime Minister, but I was even prouder that it was not that big a deal. Yeah. And that speaks volumes about the values of the British people, of our country, and of this Parliament. So will the Prime Minister join me in applauding the kindness, decency, and tolerance that has always been the British way?
Yeah. Yes, and I meant what I said when I said that we're all proud to see him standing there as Prime Minister, representing our diverse country. We were all proud. I think everybody in this House was. So I thank him for that. And his last question, final question, was Leader of the Opposition, although judging by the speed with which his party goes through leaders, he may be back here before too long, but in the meantime, I'm sure they're a great champion for the people of Richmond. But Mr. Speaker, finally, I'm sure he won't mind me disclosing to the House the contents of a letter that he wrote to me this week. My answer to it is clear. Yes, I will arrange for him to meet the relevant minister about the A66 that runs through his constituency.
So that was a brilliant joke from the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. to the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. But we eagerly await for the budget by Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer under this new Labour government. So it seems in the next minute or so, Rachel Reeves will be called to the table to deliver Labour's first budget in 14 years. So here we go. Hopefully everyone wins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On July the 4th, the country voted for change. This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal. To fix the foundations and deliver change through responsible leadership in the national interest. That is our task, and I know that we can achieve it. My belief in Britain burns brighter than ever, and the prize on offer is immense. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said on Monday, change must be felt. More pounds in people's pockets, an NHS that is there when you need it, an economy that is growing, creating wealth and opportunity for all, because that is the only way to improve living standards. And the only way to drive economic growth is to invest, invest, invest. There are no shortcuts. And to deliver that investment, we must restore economic stability and turn the page on the last 14 years. This is not the first time that it has fallen to the Labour Party to rebuild Britain. In 1945, it was the
Indeed, it's not the first time.
Second World War. In 1964, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt Britain with the white heat of technology. And in 1997, it was the Labour Party that rebuilt our schools and hospitals. Today, it falls to this Labour Party, to this Labour government, to rebuild Britain once again. And while this is the first budget in more than 14 years to be delivered by a Labour Chancellor, it is the first budget in our country's history to be delivered by a woman. I am deeply proud to be Britain's first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To girls and young women everywhere, I say, let there be no ceiling on your ambition, your hopes, and your dreams.
I agree. It's great, and she's very bold. Very, very bold.
To pass on a fairer society and a stronger generation to the next generation of women. Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite failed our country. Their austerity broke our National Health Service. Their Brexit deal harmed British businesses. And their mini-budget left families paying the price with higher mortgages. The British people have inherited their failure. A black hole in the public finances. Public services on their knees. A decade of low growth and the worst parliament on record for living standards. Let me begin with the public finances. In July, I exposed a £22 billion black hole at the heart of the previous government's plans. A series of promises that they made but had no money to deliver. Covered up from the British people, covered up from this House. The Treasury's reserve, set aside for genuine emergencies, spent 3 times over just 3 months into the financial year. Today, on top of the detailed document that I have provided to the House in July, the government is publishing a line-by-line breakdown of the £22 billion black hole that we inherited. It shows hundreds of unfunded pressures on the public finances this year and into the future too. The Office for Budget Responsibility have published their own review of the circumstances around the spring budget forecast. They say that the previous government, and I quote, did not provide the OBR with all the information to them. And had they known about these undisclosed pressures that have since come to light, then their spring budget forecast for spending would have been, and I quote again, materially different. Let me be clear. That means any comparison between today's forecast and the OBR's March forecast is false. Because the party opposite hid the reality of their public spending plans. Yet, at the very same budget, they made another £10 billion worth of cuts to national insurance. It was the height of irresponsibility, and they knew it. Because they had run out of road and they called an election to avoid making difficult choices. So let me make this promise to the British people. Never again will we allow a government to play fast and loose with our public finances. Never again will we allow a government to hide the true state of our public finances from our independent forecaster. That's why today I can confirm that we will implement in full the 10 recommendations from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibilities review. But the country has inherited not just broken public finances, but broken public services too. The British people can see and they can feel that in their everyday lives. NHS waiting lists at record levels. Children in porter cabins as school roofs crumble. Trains that do not arrive. Rivers filled with polluted waste. Prisons overflowing. Crimes which are not investigated and criminals who are not punished. That is the country's inheritance. That is the country's inheritance from the party opposite. But they had no plan to improve our public services. And they had no plan to put our public finances on a stable footing. Quite the opposite. Since 2021, there have been no detailed plans for departmental spending set out beyond this year. And their plans relied on a baseline for spending this year, which we now know was wrong, because it did not take into account the £22 billion black hole. The previous government also failed to budget for costs that they knew would materialise. That includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of 2 terrible injustices.
Quiet and let her deliver it, because this is it.
I just mentioned respecting colleagues. The public are watching, they want to hear what the Chancellor has to say.
I would politely suggest that honourable members listen to this, because it includes funding for vital compensation schemes for victims of 2 terrible injustices: the infected blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal.
Indeed, right on the point.
Of the infected blood scandal on behalf of the British state, but he did not budget for the costs of compensation.
And there you see former former Prime Minister, Chancellor and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, with his head down, indicating how bad he failed. But this lady is really like saying it as it is. So go on, Chancellor.
Of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Redress that is long overdue for the pain and injustice that they have suffered. Madam Deputy Speaker, the leadership campaign for the party opposite has now been going on for over 3 months. But in all that time, not one single apology for what they did to our country. Because the Conservative Party has not changed. But this is a changed Labour Party, and we will restore stability to our country once again. The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services. As a former economist at the Bank of England, I know what it means to respect our economic institutions. I want to put on record my thanks to the Governor of the Bank, Andrew Bailey, and to the Independent Monetary Policy Committee. Today I can confirm that we will maintain the MPC's target of 2% inflation as measured by the 12-month increase in the Consumer Prices Index. I want to thank James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, and my team of officials. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to thank my predecessors as Chancellor of the Exchequer for their wise counsel as I have prepared for this budget. In particular, I would like to thank the former Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne for his invaluable advice in this weekend's papers, where he concluded that his mini-budget, and I quote, wasn't perfect. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think him and I are in absolute agreement. Finally, I want to thank Richard Hughes and his team at the Office for Budget Responsibility for their work in preparing today's economic and fiscal outlook. Let me now take the House through that forecast. The cost of living crisis under the last government stretched household finances to their limit, with inflation hitting a peak of above 11%. Today, the OBR say that CPI inflation will average 2.5% this year, 2.6% in 2025, then 2.3% in 2026, 2.1% in 2027, 2.1% in 2028, and 2.0% in 2029. Next, I move on to economic growth. Today's budget marks an end to short-termism. So I am pleased that for the first time, the OBR have published not only 5-year growth forecasts, but a detailed assessment of the growth impacts of our policies over the next decade too. And the new Charter for Budget Responsibility, which I am publishing today, confirms that this will become a permanent feature of our framework. The OBR forecast that real GDP growth will be 1.1% in 2024, 2.0% in 2025, 1.8% in 2026, 1.5% in 2027, 1.5% in 2028, and 1.6% in 2029. And the OBR are clear, this budget will permanently increase the supply capacity of the economy, boosting long-term growth. Every budget, it might sound shocking to them, but this government is boosting long-term economic growth. Every budget that I deliver will be focused on our mission to grow the economy. And underpinning that mission are the 7 key pillars of our growth strategy, developed and delivered alongside business, all driven forward by our excellent Financial Secretary to the Treasury. First, and most important, is to restore economic stability. That is my focus today. Second, increasing investment and building new infrastructure is vital for productivity. So we are catalysing £70 billion of investment through our National Wealth Fund. And we are transforming our planning rules to get Britain building again. Third, to ensure that all parts of the UK can realise their potential, we are working with the devolved governments and partnering with our mayors to develop local growth plans. Fourth, to improve employment prospects and skills, we are creating Skills England, delivering our plans to make work pay and tackling economic inactivity. Fifth, we are launching our long-term modern industrial strategy and expanding opportunities for our small and medium-sized businesses to grow. Sixth, to drive innovation, we are protecting record funding for research and development to harness the full potential of the UK science base. And finally, to maximise the growth benefits of our clean energy mission, we have confirmed key investments such as carbon capture and storage to create jobs in our industrial heartlands. Our approach is already having an impact. Just 2 weeks ago, we delivered an international investment summit which saw businesses commit £63.5 billion of investment into our country, creating nearly 40,000 jobs across the United Kingdom. But we cannot undo 14 years of damage in one go. Economic growth will be our mission for the duration of this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our manifesto, we set out the fiscal rules that would guide this government. I am confirming those today. Our stability rule and our investment rule. The stability rule means that we will bring the current budget into balance so that we do not borrow to fund day-to-day spending. We will meet this rule in 2029-30 until that becomes the third year of the forecast. From then on, we will balance the current budget in the third year of every budget held annually each autumn. That will provide a tougher constraint on day-to-day spending so that difficult decisions cannot be constantly delayed or deferred. The OBR say that the current budget will be in deficit by £26.2 billion in 2025-26 and £5.2 billion in 2026-27, before moving into surplus of £10.9 billion in 2027-28, £9.3 billion in 2028-29, and £9.9 billion in 2029-30, meeting our stability rule 2 years early. Monthly public sector finance data show that government borrowing in the first 6 months of this year was already running significantly higher than the OBR's March forecast. And so the OBR confirmed today that borrowing in this financial year is now £127 billion, reflecting the inheritance left by the party opposite. The increase in the net cash requirement in 2024-25 is lower than the increase in borrowing, at £22.3 billion higher than the spring forecast. Because of the action that we are taking, borrowing falls from 4.5% of GDP this year to 2.1% of GDP by the end of the forecast. Public sector net borrowing will be £105.6 billion in 2025-26, £88.5 billion in 2026-27, £72.2 billion in 2027-28, £71.9 billion in 2028-29, and £70.6 billion in 2029-2030. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I come to tax, it is vital that we are driving efficiency and reducing wasteful spending. In July, to begin delivering and dealing with our inheritance, I made £5.5 billion of savings this year. Today we are setting a 2% productivity, efficiency and savings target for all departments to meet next year by using technology more effectively and joining up services across government. As set out in our manifesto, I will shortly be appointing our COVID Corruption Commissioner. They will lead our work to uncover those companies that used a national emergency to line their own pockets. Because that money belongs in our public services and taxpayers want that money back. And I can confirm today that David Goldstone has been appointed as the chair of the new Office for Value for Money to help us realise the benefits from every pound of public spending. Today, I am also taking 3 steps to ensure that welfare spending is more sustainable. First, we inherited the last government's plans to reform the work capability assessment. We will deliver those savings as part of our fundamental reforms to the health and disabilities benefit system that my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, will bring forward. Second, I can today announce a crackdown on fraud in our welfare system, often the work of criminal gangs. We will expand DWP's counter-fraud teams, using innovative new methods to prevent illegal activity and provide new legal powers to crack down on fraudsters, including direct access to bank accounts to recover debt. This package saves £4.3 billion a year by the end of the forecast. Third, the government will shortly be publishing the Get Britain Working white paper, tackling the root causes of inactivity with an integrated approach across health, education and welfare. And we will provide £240 million for 16 trailblazer projects targeted at those who are economically inactive and most at risk of being out of education, employment or training, to get people into work and to reduce the benefits bill. Before a government can consider any change to a tax rate or threshold, it must ensure that people pay what they already owe. So we will invest to modernise HMRC systems using the very best technology and recruit additional HMRC compliance and debt staff. We will clamp down on those umbrella companies who exploit workers, increase the interest rate on unpaid tax debt to ensure that people pay on time, and go after the promoters of tax avoidance schemes. These measures to reduce the tax gap raise £6.5 billion by the end of the forecast. And I want to thank the Exchequer Secretary for his outstanding work on this agenda. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that for working people up and down our country, family finances are stretched and paychecks don't go as far as they once did. So today I am taking steps to support people with the cost of living. It was the Labour government that introduced the national minimum wage in 1999. It had a transformative impact on the lives of working people. As promised in our manifesto, we asked the Low Pay Commission to take account of the cost of living for the first time. I can confirm that we will accept the Low Pay Commission recommendation to increase the national living wage by 6.7% to £12.21 an hour, worth up to £1,400 a year for a full-time worker. And for the first time, we will move towards a single adult rate phased in over time by initially increasing the national minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds by 16.3% as recommended by the Low Pay Commission, taking it to £10 an hour. A Labour policy to protect working people being delivered by a Labour government once again. Second, I have heard representations from colleagues across this House about the carers allowance and the impact of the current policy on carers looking to increase the hours that they work, including from the Honourable Members for Shipley, the Honourable Member for Scarborough and Whitby, and the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton too. Carers allowance currently provides up to £81.90 per week to help those with additional caring responsibilities. Today I can confirm that we are increasing the weekly earnings limit to the equivalent of 16 hours at the national living wage per week, the largest increase in carers allowance since it was introduced in 1976. This means that a carer can now earn over £10,000 a year while receiving carers allowance, allowing them to increase their hours where they want to and keep more of their money. I am also concerned about the cliff edge in the current system and the issue of overpayments. My right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, has announced an independent review to look at the issue of overpayments, and we will work across this House to develop the right solutions. Third, we will provide £1 billion from next year to extend the Household Support Fund and discretionary housing payments to help those facing financial hardship with the cost of essentials. Fourth, having heard representations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Trussell and others to reduce the level of debt repayments that can be taken from a household's universal credit payment each month by reducing it from 25% to 15% of their standard allowance. This means that 1.2 million of the poorest households will keep more of their award each month, lifting children out of poverty, and those who benefit will gain an average of £420 a year. Madam Deputy Speaker, our plan to make work pay will also protect working people. I know that the party opposite are deeply interested in our plans here. Having seen their colleagues repeatedly dismissed at short notice, I know that they are worried about their future under the Right Honourable Member for North West Essex. So they should rest easy, knowing that our plan will protect working people from unfair dismissal. It will safeguard them from bullying in the workplace. And it will improve their access to paternity and maternity leave. I hope that the new Shadow Cabinet will soon be grateful for these increased protections. It is right that we protect those who have worked all their lives. In our manifesto, we promised to transfer the Investment Reserve Fund in the Mine Workers Pension Scheme to members. And I have listened closely to my honourable friends for Easington, Doncaster Central, Blaenau Gwent and Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock on this issue. Today, we are keeping our promise, so that working people who powered our country receive the fair pension that they are owed. Our manifesto committed to the triple lock, meaning spending on the state pension is forecast to rise by over £31 billion by 2029-30, to ensure that our pensioners are protected in their retirement. This commitment means that while working age benefits will be uprated in line with CPI at 1.7%, the basic and new state pension will be uprated by 4.1% in 2025-26. This means that over 12 million pensioners will gain up to £470 next year, up to £275 more than if uprated by inflation. The pension credit standard minimum guarantee will also rise by 4.1%, from around £11,400 per year to around £11,850 a year for a single pensioner. While I have sought to protect working people with measures to reduce the cost of living, I've had to take some very difficult decisions on tax. I want to set out my approach to fuel duty. Baked into the numbers that I inherited from the previous government is an assumption that fuel duty will rise by RPI next year, and that the temporary 5p cut will be reversed. To retain the 5p cut and to freeze fuel duty again would cost over £3 billion next year. At a time when the fiscal position is so difficult, I have to be frank with the House that this is a substantial commitment to make. I have concluded that in these difficult circumstances, while the cost of living remains high, and with a backdrop of global uncertainty, increasing fuel duty next year would be the wrong choice for working people. It would mean fuel duty rising by 7p per litre. So I have decided today to freeze fuel duty next year, and I will maintain the existing 5p cut for another year too. There will be no higher taxes at the petrol. There will be no higher taxes at the petrol pumps next year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the last government made cuts of £20 billion to employees and self-employed national insurance in their final two budgets. These tax cuts were not honest. Because we now know that they were based on a forecast which the OBR say would have been materially different. It would have been materially different had they known the true extent of the last government's cover-up. Since July, I have been urged on multiple occasions to reconsider these cuts, to increase the taxes that working people